Is it time to dismantle some doctrines? If you don't know what that means, then come along with me. I'm Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Bible college teacher and pastor of more than 20 years. Join me as we deconstruct whatever dogmas and beliefs have held you behind, and together work to reconstruct and rebuild your authentic self. I'm really happy to be speaking today with Beth Granger. We finally got a chance to meet up. She's the author of a book called Born and Razed. That's R-A-Z-E-D. Surviving the cult was only half the battle. So welcome back to the Dismantling Doctrine podcast.
Thank you, Clint. I'm so happy to be here.
I think we connected on Facebook. I'm pretty sure we must have some mutual friends because you're coming from Canada. Are you friends with Janice Selby by any chance?
I am, yes. She was one of my book's endorsers, and then I just started following you, and one thing led to another.
One thing led to another. The second I saw that you were talking about cults, cult psychology, and that's a big interest of mine. You were raised in this cult. We're going to get into your story. I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fascinating and disturbing at the same time. But yeah, it's amazing to compare stories, I think, isn't it? If you go through and analyze cult psychology, cult tactics, you think, oh my God, these were the things that they did to me. These were the tactics they used on us. Have you found that to be an empowering part of your healing process coming out on the back end?
Absolutely. I've been out since 2001, but I've been healing ever since. And one huge part of healing has been reading people's stories and then podcasts whenever they came. I didn't start listening to them till, I don't know, in the last 10 years, but so healing and empowering to hear all the ways these coercive tactics are used on so many people and even mainline churches. It's been really eye-opening, but so healing.
We were just saying before we hit record, and we were talking about you being a Canadian. I'm an American expat living over here in the UK for the last 21 years, watching the Trump effect. I was just watching a thing on YouTube today, and they were talking about the Trump rallies, and there's this obvious overlaps and parallels between maybe some of our experiences in these Christian churches and cults. This sort of cult reinforcement doctrine. You go to these rallies, and it's the same thing every time, and the point gets driven home, and you're part of the in-group, and there's the out-group, and it's just, wow, we're talking cult tactics even on the presidential level. It's the same
I know.
dynamic,
I couldn't understand as a Canadian how triggered I got even in 2016. Because I had no idea it was going to get this bad, but I could see how Trump was being used and basically worshipped by Christians. And it just seemed so cult-like. I was just really starting healing then, but I could feel triggered, like they're all just watching all these people fall for this. Cried and cried when he was voted in. And then in 2020, I cried for almost 2 days when his almost voted in again, because I just felt like I'm surrounded by people who are indoctrinated, and it's been very triggering as an ex-cult member, to watch this happen.
Yeah, you see, you think, how can people fall for it? And that's what I was watching this thing on YouTube, and it was saying that it's not about stupidity, because that's a common trope, isn't it? Only stupid people, only idiots get sucked into cults, but that's not true at all. You can be very well educated, very intelligent. It's more about vulnerability, I think, isn't it? And here's a guy like Trump. He's appealing to the rage and the anger and the grievances of a huge swath of Americans, particularly Christians, and yet they're falling for it. And we voted for him and elected him again, despite of all the things he did the first time.
Yeah, like even my brother, we'll get into my story, but one of my brothers is still in the cult. He's a monk. Like in the cult that we had, you could be called by God to be a monk or a nun. And so when he was 21, he was told that by the leaders that he was called to be a monk, as one does. He's almost 60 now and still trapped in there. But yeah, when I heard he'd voted for Trump in 2016, I couldn't believe it.
How does this happen?
And again, I'm sure he doesn't spend much time watching the news, but what little he's told, he believes. And he's very intelligent. We had a good education. So it's been really tough watching this happen.
Especially when you got family members. Okay, speaking of the book, maybe that's a good segue. Can we go right back to the beginning? Because I understand you were born into this cult. What was the cult and
Mhm.
what was your experience? Can you tell us the story beginning?
Sure. So the cult it's small. It's only we're talking less than 500 people, I'd say. What happened was I was born as the first baby to staff members of a private religious school, a boarding school in Canada. And we advertised and became an elite private school that had an excellent reputation. What was really happening was we were a cult that was hiding in plain sight. We advertised as being an Anglican institution, which legitimized our school. And in some ways, we were Anglican because our two headmasters were Anglican priests. But what really was happening was a whole different story. And so what happened the school almost went bankrupt when I was 3 years old. I was born into it the year that it started. And then 3 years later, it almost fell apart. So they were seeking outside guidance from spiritual leaders that they knew. And the headmaster at the time, or the founders of our school, knew these two women who were running a commune in Cape Cod called the Community of Jesus. And it was, I guess you'd call it non denominational, but they were very much charismatic at the time. And they came up to Canada and led a retreat. And within 2 weeks, they had basically taken over as our spiritual leaders. And they had they had basically made it clear to all the staff who were already missionaries willing to give their lives to win the world for Christ, if you will. They basically said, look, we know that God is calling this school to be a very special institution, and it's going to fall apart unless you follow what God's calling. And they were already so vulnerable, just believed and obeyed and submitted to requirements and the teachings of these women who were very charismatic and
Very persuasive.
I don't persuasive, yes. And they pulled out all the stops in terms of love bombing. And then the flip side, which was requiring every single staff member to make a lifetime confession and then using those confessions against them. Then very soon, like, warning anyone who leaves, you're leaving your God's call. You've all been specially picked by God for this mission. If you follow us, the school will prosper. You won't be able to even imagine how many students show up on your doorstep. And so they were really, in the case of my parents, they were desperate to have the school succeed. Many of them had moved from the States to start the school in Canada, which was really right on the border of Canada and the United States. We were right on the St. Lawrence River. So basically bought in. And what ended up happening was, under the influence of these two women, our school became an institution of paranoia that brainwashed, abused, terrorized students for decades. What was even more crazy is that no one really knew the truth until it went bankrupt in 2007, 6 years after I'd left. I left at age 31. But from the outside, the school appeared to be a successful, beautiful institution. It enjoyed a great reputation. We had patrons on the board from outside of the school to add legitimacy, and they were from the highest levels of society. We had 3 lieutenant governors of Ontario. We had a High Commissioner to Great Britain. We had senators on the board. We had Bishop of Ontario, Anglican Bishop of Ontario. If
Real
you were an
heavyweights.
outside parent,
Yeah.
sorry,
Some real
heavyweights,
heavyweights. Yeah,
yeah.
you
And
go, okay, this is
they
legitimate.
had no idea what was going on. To their credit, they were lifting up and adding credit to this school with their names and reputations, but they didn't know what was really happening. And the truth didn't come out until the school went bankrupt in 2007. And that's when people felt safe to come forward with their stories of abuse. And at which point my eyes were opened. And because I had just been out for 5 or 6 years by then, and I was only then coming to terms with how much of a basket case I was, and I didn't understand why. And yeah, I learned very quickly through reading. We can get into all that, but I then joined a lawsuit, spearheaded a lawsuit against our abusers. And spoiler alert, we became the first historical abuse case to win at trial in Canada
Yeah, so that's
against
huge.
the school. So yeah, my book, Born and Razed, the first, I'd say, to half, at least half, is living cult and then escaping. And then the second half is how I've been trying to recover. And the lawsuit was a big part of that.
That's a big element
So,
of so many of our stories, isn't it? It's only half the story to tell about what
mhm,
actually happened to us. The other
yeah,
half, the deconstruction side, and then the
yeah,
reconstruction, that could be a lifetime's effort, couldn't it? Of getting educated, getting therapy, getting whatever it might be, counseling, support from a community or something like that, like-minded people or people who've had the same experience. That's, I think, that's sometimes overlooked. Okay, get out. That's one thing. Yeah, I'm glad you
yeah.
got out, but you got to rebuild your life entirely on the back end, don't you? This huge project ahead.
Yes, and as I was writing the book, I wanted to write something that I needed to read when I got out. Something showed me that I was not some kind of a crazy person for having these difficulties, because our indoctrination goes so deep. And yeah, I know you asked me to tell about the actual place, which I haven't even started, but yeah, it to your point, I had no idea many layers and levels to lay ahead. Even when I joined the lawsuit, I had no idea how hard it would be, and I wouldn't have joined it if I had known. But I knew that it would be a source of healing. I knew it would force me to do some sort of healing, and I didn't know how extensive that would be.
Yeah.
But I was right. My intuition was right. So I'm glad I did do that. But it was also incredibly excruciatingly difficult.
You're
Um,
forced to confront a lot of issues that, yeah, we could easily just bury them and sweep them under the carpet, but I've
mhm.
found that it's like those things that we just, if we sweep them under the rug, they can be very triggering later. We can have experiences that are debilitating and blindsiding. So when we're triggered, you think, okay, I've got some work to do in this area. I didn't realize I had
Mhm.
religious trauma syndrome and other things from abuse and all
Yeah.
sorts of things that happened when you were in this cult. But yeah, we do have a lot to work through. Can we name this institution? Is that something you can do?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all over the news. It's in the matter of public record now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was Grenville Christian College in Brockville, Ontario, about an hour from our nation's capital, and the Community of Jesus is the cult that was directly influencing our. We were all the staff at Grenville had to be vowed members of the Community of Jesus in Cape Cod, and you couldn't work at our school unless you took vows of obedience to the Mothers for Life. So it was very,
Very
very
controlling.
unique in that way. Yeah, it was. We were all specifically called by God to live there and take up the mantle for Christ. And all of us kids who were born there, us staff kids, we were told that we were called to follow in their footsteps. And there was no question that if we ever left or escaped, we were turning our back on God, and we would end up going straight to hell and live on the streets and all the
Mm-hmm.
other things that
Classic
they
cult
tell us.
psychology. Yeah, you're told it's all sown in fear and control, and that
Hmm.
you can never leave. And if you do leave, you're going to
Yeah.
be shunned and the dispensing of existence. What was the average demographic for the learners at this college? Was it like a university level, college age? Or
No.
was it a
So
school, like a
yeah,
primary
so we call
school?
it college, but in the I think it's the British tradition that colleges like ours are kindergarten through grade 12.
Mm-hmm.
If it's these elite colleges, but
Yeah, like an
it's really
academy. Yeah, it's a
LA in high school.
yeah. So it's billed as like an
So
elite. Yeah, it was basically a private
yeah.
school. People paid send their kids to school there. Is that how
Oh,
it
yeah.
worked?
So it was anyone from grade 7 through 12 could be boarding students. You had to board if you were 9, grades 9 and over, you had to be a boarding student. And it would cost anywhere to be a boarding student. It was about 20 to $30,000 a year.
A lot of
So
money.
these are people, and even from when my very youngest age, like memories, we had students from all over the world. We would have family nights, and I remember kids from Hong Kong and Argentina and Switzerland. We People send their kids to these schools from all over the world. Most of them came from Canada, but I would say we had at least 25% of the students were international. And yeah, so the kicker was people were sending their kids to this school thinking they were getting an excellent education. And we had about 100 staff members. So, you're getting your kids are getting excellent small classes and so much care and love from all these staff. They didn't know that what was really happening was a buffet of coercive tactics were being used against the students to kind of mold them into becoming little possible members of this cult. They were often targeting the students they wanted to break them down, basically. That was actually a motto which we didn't advertise. It was, we're going to break you down and build you up the Grenville way. And so some of the things they did, they couldn't be as cruel to them as we staff kids experienced. It was classic cult tactics from the beginning. They removed us from our parents. We couldn't live with our parents because our parents were told that they were too sinful. And their specific sin that was targeted was their sin of idolatry, which meant that they loved their children. And if they love their children, that's a sin because you need to love your God and only God. So I was moved when I was 4. And then we were constantly being attacked for our sins in these sessions that were called light sessions that the mothers instituted. And they were light sessions because they were trying to bring sin to light. And so people would just be attacked in public, either in small groups or sometimes the entire school would be a light session that could be a whole day where one by one students were stood up and publicly humiliated. And not only that, the disciplines were just draconian and meant to break people, break their spirits. And you could be disciplines were, oh my gosh. Yeah, it was so awful because you were never told how long the discipline would be. It would be indefinite until you've changed. So again, it's like this, it's like you can't put a finger on what's wrong with you and how to change it. So you have to really buy in and pretend, or not. In my case, I didn't pretend. I was desperate to be what they wanted me to be. There was this spy network too. So you never could trust people because people were constantly trying to turn each other in. And you could be,
it sounds Stalinist
exactly,
Russia or something.
to protect yourself. Yeah, turn someone else in, you'd be protected a little while. And I don't know, just the disciplines too. Anything from strenuous hard labor, where you weren't allowed to go to school or wear the uniform, or even live in the dorm. Anything from that to harsh beatings with the paddle. You could be beaten for having a bad attitude or not turning someone in, or even having one of the things that they got into a lot was sinning in your mind. So people were often in trouble for that. And how do you even defend yourself against that?
Exactly.
Yeah. And there were tons of rules, but a lot of the rules were just unwritten, and it was just a constant. You just never knew what you'd be in trouble for next. Yeah. Because anytime you thought you could get your act together and you could play, the rules would change and it'd get harder and weirder.
Move the goalposts back on you. Yeah, so constantly keep you shifting. I'm just thinking of at least 2 cult models here. I'm sure you're familiar with Stephen Hassan's The Bite model, behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control. What you just described ticks all the markers of the Bite model.
Oh,
you can put those in there. Certainly the emotional control, thought crimes, sins against God, or sins against people who ran the school, the leadership. And then Robert J. Lifton's 8 markers of cults: milieu control, controlling the environment, the cult of confession, the demand for purity, the dispensing of existence, sacred science, the teachings of the doctrine over person, you're turning someone else in, which is more important than a personal relationship. It hits all the markers of a cult from what I could see. But my question is, how come the parents of these learners didn't know what was going on? Let's say you're from Canada or another country. You've sent your child or children to this school. How could the children not be able to say, hey, mom and dad, this place is horribly abusive and toxic. Get me out of here. Did that happen?
Yep, it did. So like I don't know if people who, your listeners are following the troubled teen industry, but it's very much like that. So if you get your child, the parents are told right from the get-go, you need to sign this contract. And on the contract, they'll explain, your child is going to tell you that they don't like it here. They're going to complain. They're going to, come up with all kinds of reasons they don't want to be here because we're really strict and we really want the best for them. So parents were told up front that if your kid complains, expect that and don't fall for it. And if a parent even got so worried that they would contact the school and say, "What is this my kid is saying?" they'd be lied to. And administration would straight up lie. And it became this thing where students quickly realized it was unsafe to tell their parents because then if the parent complains, then the kid is even more under attack,
Right.
and more than they would be. How dare you tell your parents that this is, you're a lie blood of, anyway.
So that's a
I've
losing
talked to so
game.
many
Yeah.
students who,
So,
yeah, and I've talked to students who ran away because they were in so much pain there. And then when they managed to get home, their parents wouldn't let them come back home. So students have been on the streets since the age of 15 when they ran away. It There have been many kids' lives who are broken in that way. Also, threat of disappointing your parents, because a lot of students were told they were so sinful and they believed it. They thought, I guess I am a sinner. So then they don't want their parents to hear how sinful they are. Do you know what I mean? Or being told that they are. And also, parents are spending all this money, and a kid doesn't want their parents' money to be wasted. Because you couldn't leave halfway through and get your money back. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So
they had it
for
set up that
many,
way.
I think the hard thing was, even if a kid did manage to convince their parent that it was really not a good place for them, there was no way to really complain and push back against this institution because, as I said before, had such a good reputation and had so many really powerful people behind it. One time, some kids went to the local newspaper and they were doing an investigative story. This was when I was 19. The school got wind that the story was being written,
It's
researched.
about to break.
So they
Yeah.
contacted their powerful lawyers in Toronto. The lawyers contacted the paper and said, "Write this story. We're going to close you down." And they didn't publish the story. And editor of the newspaper, the owner, he said it was the biggest regret of his career because it didn't close again. Like, that was when I was 19. It didn't close till I was 37. So many more students
Yeah.
went on to be,
Almost another 20 years,
yeah,
more than almost a couple of decades, they got away with it.
yeah.
It's an evil
Mhm.
genius, isn't it? From what you're describing, the school had this whole setup. That really good because what you said about the troubled teen industry, because I watched a documentary, I think it was either on Netflix or Amazon recently, about exposing one of these troubled teen. It was back in the
Mhm.
70s and 80s out of California, I think it was, and yeah, it's exactly
Yeah.
the same thing. Of course, you're sending your troubled children to this, and it's going to be tough. It's like military style discipline. And so,
Yeah.
yes, the kid's going to complain because, of course, they're not going to like it. So, they've built in this protective shell around the school already. So, the kid isn't
Yeah.
going to be believed when he or she is complaining to mom and dad about how terrible it was. So, you were born into it, though, because I remember you said earlier, you said that there was almost like a double standard. It was bad enough for the typical learner who was
Yeah.
sent there by their parents, but you had a slightly different experience. How was that different? You said it was harsher in a way, if that could be possible, than the typical learner.
Yeah. Yeah. So everyone says the staff kids had it worse. And in many ways we did. And I can argue that it was worse for us, but I could also see that some being dropped into a cult with no idea
Very
how to
disorienting.
that's even harder, because I at least was trained to be able to cope in this scenario. I knew
Yeah, you were born
how
into it.
to, yeah, I normalized it. And some of the things that were so much harder for us, we couldn't live with our parents. The standard for us was so much higher. We were taught that that God had called us to be there for life, I mentioned. So we were taught that we were basically staff members, even when we were teenagers. And we had to be eyes and ears for the staff, like part of the spy network. And our expectations were just, we had to be so perfectly behaved. And yet we also had to fit in with the students and live with them. And so you're constantly walking this tightrope of trying to be friends and accepted by students, but also accepted and trusted by the staff. So I found that really hard to walk. And I got in so much trouble when I would befriend students and try to be liked by them. But we also had, so I would say for us, the worst parts were, other than being separated from your parents, were that we had light sessions much more often than the students. The students would probably mostly see them en masse, like the whole student body, which is terrifying. Sometimes a student would have a light session if they were being targeted for a specific infraction or sin, and they would have them small. Many students had small light sessions behind closed doors, but us staff kids, we had them regularly, actually scheduled into our lives. And also in the summers and breaks, they'd happen pretty much any meals. It was, I have in my book, just like the beginning, I remember very distinctly a big light session when I was around kindergarten age, that just one of thousands, but it really stuck out to me. Watching, for example, your parents be stood up and just lambasted for their sins is extremely harmful for a little one, especially when I can't even live with them. But either way, it was just horrible. I was constantly seeing my parents being publicly shamed and humiliated. And then our disciplines as staff kids, the way they indoctrinated us and broke us on purpose was incredibly cruel. For some reason, the mothers, their brand of Christianity was really close to what you think of the monastic tradition, where the
Mm-hmm.
nuns and the monks have to be broken. So it's death to self. They were always preaching the key is death to self, and that you're nothing, and without God you can do nothing. Even everything is caused by your sin. It's very much this is in many churches, but it was just heightened, right? So they were constantly trying to break us. And for me, I was put on a diet when I was 5, for example, for my gluttony, which I have been fighting my whole life to heal from an eating disorder that started when I was 5. And then things like you could never get it right. So I was very academic. We were in this really high achieving school where students were getting a good education. All I wanted was to really get educated well too. And it became one of my sins was that I was too haughty. And by grade 9, I wasn't allowed to see my grades because they didn't want me to have an ego. Things like that.
It turned against you in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
So
And I
obviously,
mean,
you went through the school as a learner yourself. You were not only a staff
yeah.
kid, but so you went through the entire Grenville system. But you came
Mhm.
back. How did that happen? Because obviously, you didn't leave till you were in your late 30s. So did you come back staff member? How did that work?
I didn't come back. We lived on campus. So all the
Right.
staff lived on campus. And
You never left.
that was another thing. They controlled every part of our lives. So we are constantly being moved. You never ever got settled into a certain spot. I remember one year I was moved 8 times. But so when I graduated from high school, just the next day I started working as a staff member.
Right.
And I just moved down the hallway to the staff residence or whatever, you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Immediate
So,
transition. Yeah.
exactly.
So you weren't
And
off to
and we were being
university or
prepared.
anything like that. Yeah, I've done really.
No.
Obviously, you did academically. You could have gone to university and gone somewhere and done something with your degree, but that wasn't
Well,
allowed.
that was another yeah, it was really weird because the staff were the teachers too, right? So I thought, at least I can be a teacher if I stay here. I didn't want to go to the community. That was the other thing, is they constantly would say, "We think God's called you to move to Cape Cod, to the community." You never knew when the leaders would tell you something like this, but I really wanted to be a teacher. And I was told at age 19 that I was too haughty to be a teacher. And if I was a teacher, I wouldn't be close enough to God. But I still kept pushing to get part-time courses through a local university. I would go once a week to night courses, or in the summer, I'd go I'd get permission, and some of us were taking courses bit by bit on the side. So I did get my degree, but it took me 6 years, my undergrad. But even that I got flack for. Why are you trying to get a degree? You don't need a degree to do the work we're giving you.
God's
Um,
work. Yeah.
exactly. But it bugged me because we were putting out that we were advertising as being this excellent school, and yet a lot of the teachers there were not credited, and they didn't
Right.
have actual degrees, teaching degrees. And that actually wasn't illegal. You can do that as a private school, which is one of the things that I'm trying to get people to realize, that private schools need to have a lot more scrutiny.
Exactly.
Um,
There's more leeway
Yeah.
there, but yeah,
So,
if you're going to send your kid there to a
yeah.
private school, you want to make sure that the
Hmm.
people who are teaching your son or daughter or whoever it is
Yep.
actually have the academic credentials for those subjects.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I was there all through my 20s and didn't get the courage to leave till I was 31. But yeah, in the book I talk about so many more ways that I was disciplined. It just never stopped. Even as soon as you just started feeling the least bit good about yourself, another discipline would be just ta-da.
Beat you down.
Here's what's next.
Yes, you're always off balance. So you were on staff there after you graduated for almost 20 years, 18, 17, 18 years before you escaped. Is
No,
that what happened?
no, I was on staff for 10, 11 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
did you escape
Um,
in the end? It must have been a huge thing to get out of there.
it was so difficult because I was imprisoned in my own mind. We could walk out.
Yeah.
There were
It
no
wasn't like a
chains on
compound with
the
guards and
yeah,
dogs and guns. A
exactly.
classic cold
But
compound.
it was a campus. So it's like we couldn't even go to town without getting permission. Going to get some groceries or toiletries. I have a story where one time I needed a new toothbrush because mine had fallen into the toilet, and I had to go to my supervisors. I was 25, and go to my supervisors and ask for permission to go to town, and they made me go back and pray, make sure it was God's will, and I couldn't hear God's will about it.
Yeah.
And it really frustrated me.
Just to get a toothbrush. So yeah, this is your experience. You're being in a tightly controlled environment, but it wasn't like a physical jail, a prison. But like you say, you're a prisoner of your own mind. You've been conditioned that you can't leave. So how did you end up getting out in the end? What was the final catalyst that got you out of there?
So yeah, it took me 3 years to basically drum up the courage, and I left by degrees. So I think I mentioned before, we couldn't work at the school unless we lived on campus and had taken vows of obedience to the mothers for life. Um, I started near the end of my 20s, I started to become deeply unhappy, deeply depressed. Um, I thought that was because I was such a sinner. I thought, you know what? I don't think I can do this for the rest of my life and actually mean it. I just started questioning my vows. I didn't question them. I questioned myself. And I started realizing I'm not cut out for this. It didn't help that I couldn't get married there because there were no men left, and we couldn't marry unless
Yeah,
we had to
within the
marry
group.
within the little pool of people.
Yeah, very
And
small
I had,
pool. Yeah.
yeah, I had been engaged when I was 26, and to a man that I was working with in an office situation. And for some reason, which he didn't tell me, he couldn't tell me, he broke it off 8 months after we were engaged. And the pain of having been loved, felt that love, and then having it taken away for no reason, it just sent me over the edge.
Yeah, devastating.
Because I had spent a lifetime of not being loved by my parents, by anyone, and finally somebody had treated me like I mattered, and all of a sudden he just withdrew it. I just couldn't get over that, and I just felt so overwhelmed with sadness and pain that I started thinking, I think I've got to maybe leave. And it scared me to do that. But um, then at the same time, and this is basically, I'm telling how my personal indoctrination started to crack, which takes time.
Oh,
So at the
absolutely.
very same time, my knee I needed surgery for my knee. And after the surgery, I was told to do physio out in the great big sinful
Mm.
world, and
Ooh, watch
and
out.
also get to aquafit classes out in the great sinful YMCA. And I started to get stronger, fitter, meet people who strangely weren't that evil, and they were actually really friendly.
What a shock. They
And I
weren't
started,
horrible, satanic,
yeah,
demonic, possessed people out there like you'd been taught all your
yeah,
life. That must have
exactly.
been
So
very
I started,
disorienting.
it was, and I started feeling like a caged animal. And I also started questioning things. And for the first time, I started not being able to stand the light sessions because I could see through attacks on our sins that in my mind were absolute bullshit. And for the first time, I started to see that people were making up sins against each other just for the sake of doing that.
Yeah, just
And,
have that
and I
control.
couldn't stand it anymore. So I just, it was the first time I didn't feel like so shamed by other people. I started feeling angry with other people. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And, it's funny because my grandfather had left me money when I was 24, and I didn't realize that he'd given me the keys to my freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I put it away. I just invested it. But by 31, I used that money and I finally decided I'm going back to Queen's University. I'm going to become a teacher, just like they said I couldn't
Yeah,
be.
you couldn't. That
And
dream you
I
had.
enrolled in Queen's University, got in, and I gave them notice and finally left. I tried very hard to keep good ties with them because anyone else I'd seen leave had been shunned. And by 31, I did not want to be shunned. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
my only people, my only friends, my
Yeah, it's
only,
your lifeline.
family. Yeah. But it became difficult because I felt definitely could tell that I was not part. I was not, I mean, they weren't like cruel to me, but once
Yeah, you were gone.
um, yeah, I then went off into the world, and I actually I didn't become a prostitute, and
Like
I
they
didn't
said,
end up on the
on the
streets.
streets, a junkie on the streets. Yeah.
But but so by all on the surface, my life actually became quite successful. I met someone, got married soon after. I have 2 kids. I'm still with him. But everything started to unravel a few years in because I was an emotional mess, and I had a raging eating disorder, which was a silver lining because it forced me into therapy and forced me to get help that I needed. But yeah, that's how I left.
Yeah. So it was a slow process, but you did get out.
Hmm.
So how did the
Yeah.
lawsuit come about then? So you're getting help, you're getting therapy for your eating disorders, your religious trauma syndrome, and all these
Yeah.
other things. How did that end up coming about? Because I think, did you say that the college ended up closing down, or was that part of the lawsuit that shut it down?
Yeah, it was not we would I wouldn't have dreamed of starting a lawsuit before they shut down because the place was so powerful and had such an incredible reputation. And if you came out and said I was abused there, you'd get completely shut down.
Hmm.
Everyone would tell you you're crazy. What happened was the year that it shut down, the summer that it shut down was 2007. Everybody started finding there was a online forum called Fact, and it was for cult survivors who could post anonymously. And people just started by word of mouth. Have you heard of this place? And we all joined with our usernames, and hundreds of posts just flooded on there daily almost. And I happened to be off work that summer because I was on maternity leave. So I had a little extra time, a little, to start reading. And my eyes were just wide open because I had never known or acknowledged the fact that it had been not only a cult, but a very damaging place. And it had severely impacted hundreds of thousands of people.
Hmm. Yeah. A
So,
true destructive
yeah, it
cult,
didn't,
wasn't it then? Yeah.
it was extremely. And I realized something has to happen here. At least they have to come and publicly acknowledge so that people can get some closure. But they did the opposite. They went not only on FactNet were people talking, but they went to the newspapers. The story broke our big national newspapers, and the school was interviewed, and the last few headmasters were interviewed, and they publicly denied
Yeah.
that the
Of
school
course
had
they did.
abused anyone. And that was the catalyst for me and several others who knew the truth. And I was like, they're never gonna apologize. People are never gonna get healing. So I guess we'd better tell this to the courts. And
Yeah.
I didn't know what we were getting into, but I just felt like so many students' lives had been terribly impacted. By then I could see for myself. At that time I didn't think I had been abused. I just could see, sorry,
Everybody
I could
else had.
see what had happened with other people, and I thought I was there that long.
Yeah, you could
I
certainly
can I
document
can
this
tell
stuff.
what I saw. So, but little did I know was that I did definitely help, but I also had been very much abused and I just didn't know it yet. I hadn't normalized it so much.
Yeah, you were saying earlier
That's
that
how the
forced you to confront your own past, as it
exactly.
were, some of the
Mhm.
demons and skeletons in your closet you weren't aware.
Yeah.
Did you end up getting therapy or counseling as a result of having to go through that experience as well?
I had already started therapy by the time the lawsuit was proposed. I'd started the year before, and I have been seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist ever since. That's like almost 50, wait, I can't do math today. It's almost 20 years of
Wow,
therapy.
a lot
Yes,
of
to answer
healing.
your question, yes.
Yeah. So what ended?
But it's funny because I even going into the lawsuit, even having therapy, I still couldn't deal with some of the worst memories, some because to live in a cult that long, you really have to dissociate. You just do. And you have to push things down so far that you don't remember them. And so it wasn't till I actually had to go to trial, which lawsuits almost never do, but ours went to trial. And I was on the stand for 3 days.
Mm,
And I knew going like leading up to that, that I needed to start unlocking some memories. And I started writing in a journal. And I'd bring my journal to therapy and sit there shaking, wondering if I was like, if my memories mattered. And my therapist was gobsmacked. And that was 2019. And that was like, that ushered in a whole new level of healing where I had to really get into the kinds of things like process the kinds of trauma that I had forgotten or that I didn't want to think about.
yeah,
Because
just have
I
to
think you
suppress
mentioned
it.
it before, but a lot of us leave these places and all we do is we try to outrun it. We try to overachieve and we try to succeed in the world and we try to outrun it because it's too painful to stop and sit with it.
Yeah, it'll catch up to you.
And yeah, and I could no longer do that. Then writing the book was another level of deep healing that I needed because it's the universe, I don't know, leads us to where we need to go in terms of healing. And I never thought I'd write a book, but it became the way that I was able to access those memories and to process them on the page. So,
Yeah, it can be very powerful.
yeah,
I found that to be the case when I wrote my book. It was just like this
yeah,
cathartic experience. I actually
yeah,
I didn't intend to set out and write a book. I just kind of like you thought I
yeah.
want to share these stories kind of with myself and work through them, my own upbringing. So yeah, it can be very cathartic. So what ended up happening in the lawsuit? Where we're getting low on time, but I'm kind of curious to
Yeah.
find out. So how did it end up being? Was it settled in any way? Did they ever were they forced to apologize or admit they'd done anything wrong?
So in Canada, the way these lawsuits work is you have a, if it goes to trial, which 99% of them never do, most of them settle before even there's a possibility of trial. But they were trying to settle with us with such ridiculously low amounts of money that we said, no, we're going to trial. So we got to trial after 12 years of the lawsuit. It got to trial and won. And that trial. It worked. It was 5 weeks in Toronto at the Superior Court. And we won the common issues trial, which basically states that a systemic abuse occurred and all the students who were in the class were exposed to it. So then after that, they appealed. So we had to go through 2 more years of the appeals court and we won that as well. And then after that, we had to go to the next stage, which was the reparations stage, working out if people get any damages or money. We ended up, because those of us who were representative plaintiffs, I was one of five, we ended up knowing how difficult it was to be cross examined. And we just knew that people would not be able to handle their own trials. So we ended up settling with them so that people wouldn't have to go through their own personal trials. there
Re-traumatized.
were It was traumatizing and as hard enough for people to even write their statement of claims or their statements of experience was extremely traumatizing for a lot of people. Some people even died by suicide during the process.
Wow.
Um, and but in the end, we were able to settle for a certain amount of money, and then it got divvied up. There's no way that the money, it can't possibly represent the need that people would need therapy at what have you, but it was a symbolic representation of the school having to admit, you know, they never apologized, by the way. And you do, you,
Of
if you're
course
going to
not.
go through civil trial, you can't expect an apology
Oh no, they're not going to
because
apologize or admit any
no,
wrongdoing,
right.
even though it was
Exactly. But
proven in a court of law that yeah, there was
right.
systemic years, decades of systemic abuse to
Yeah.
thousands of learners and staff. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Validating to have the courts. I started my book, the first prologue, how I reacted so emotionally when I heard a lawyer first speak on our behalf. I just broke into sobs that I couldn't even contain
Mm.
hearing a lawyer speak on our behalf. It's just incredibly healing to have story taken seriously in a court. So, yeah, I hope people will find that eye-opening but also validating if they've been through any kind of religious trauma or any kind of coercive trauma,
Yeah, any high
like
control
that.
group, yeah, there may be a way to
Mhm.
fight back. It might even be in the court system. You never know. Is the cult still going in Cape Cod? Because obviously the college is gone. Is that right? It's closed down, but this, you said your brother's still involved in it, so there must be something that's still on somewhere.
So at Cape Cod, their cult is going strong. They have lost, I would say, quite a few members have left, but they're still very strong, litigious, and rich.
So they've got money.
In
Yeah,
fact, warned that I'd be sued if I put out my book because we didn't name them in our lawsuit, but they have been implicated
yeah. You
indirectly
could
through
figure it
this
out.
whole thing. They were even named by our judges ruling in the ruling. To answer your question, yes, they're still going strong. And unfortunately, they are now openly Christian nationalists, which wasn't part of the mix when we were growing up. But now they're following people like Lance Wallnau, Dutch Sheets,
Mm-hmm.
and they're becoming militant, and they are arming themselves and doing military training with AR-15s
Whoa.
and sniper rifles and such. So it's really scary, and they've been in the news a lot lately because people are starting to pay attention because it is quite alarming.
Absolutely. So
Uh,
they're like a paramilitary group involved with this new apostolic reformation stuff,
yeah.
Seven Mountains Mandate, Dominion
Yes.
theology.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a whole nother subject. We could talk about that. I'm aware of the time, so just reminding us the book is called Born and Razed. Surviving the Cult was only half the battle. How can people find the book? And then my other question is how can they get a hold of you if they wanted to get a hold of you on social media? What's the best way?
I guess my social media handles they're all on my website, which is my name, bethgranger.ca. So it's probably the easiest way to find me. You can also send me an email from there. Yeah, I would love to hear from especially anybody who wants to chat or connect for any reason. Publishing the book has been incredibly healing, but the biggest healing I have actually received being able to talk about this with people for what so many people have related, and it's been quite shocking because we were a strange little cult, but there is so much about my story that is resonating with everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So,
As we say, yeah,
yeah.
the list of cult tactics is actually fairly small, but when you start comparing stories, the thing you may not have been in your exact experience, but the overlaps, the parallel, and then the psychological damage, the emotional
Yeah,
damage on the back end is something we all have to deal with, no matter what we came out of, whether it was
exactly.
Scientology or Jehovah's Witness or fundamentalist
Yeah.
Christianity, whatever it might have been. We can bond over those shared experiences. Listen, Beth, thank you so much. I really appreciate your vulnerability and talking about these. I know it's obviously been painful. You're still, I can see you're still, it's right there on the surface, isn't it? Even though you've had 20 years of therapy. So I appreciate your
Yeah.
sharing all these things. I definitely want to connect with you again. I hope we can stay in touch.
I would love that. It really means a lot to me. Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing, trying to understand Christian nationalism. People like you are just like, I am a sponge trying to figure out what is going on.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. Yeah, there's more to
Yeah.
unpack for sure. But yeah, I've been doing
Mhm.
obviously a lot conversation with Dr. Warren Throckmorton just the other day as I talked
Mhm.
to him about his new book. So there's a lot of things happening, shining the light on this stuff. But yeah, as you say, it's becoming weaponized. That's the real danger now.
It is.
So we have another
It
thing to
is.
watch out for.
Yeah, and I just one last thing, I don't think I mentioned this, is one of the reasons I wrote my book is to basically be one more voice to say This kind of damage is sometimes not fixable. This is harmful. The kinds of
Yeah.
the indoctrination and the damage that you can do with weaponized religion, it is extremely problematic on the individual and societal level. So, yeah, I just want people to pay attention.
That is true. Yeah, a destructive cult is damaging to the followers and the members, but yeah, it can have a wider impact on
Yeah.
society at large. Yeah, that's a really good
Yeah.
point. All right, thank you so much, Beth. I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Thank you for talking to
That'd
me,
be great.
and have a great day.
Thank you, you too. Appreciate it.